Very nice. Okay, so let's crack on. So thanks for the intro. So Huxley, 60 years ago, quoted, "Technology was made for men and not men for technology. But unfortunately, the development of recent social and scientific history has created a world in which man seems to be made for technology rather than the other way around. We have to start thinking about this problem very seriously to see how we can re-establish control over our own inventions." And as we can see, 60 years ago, he was already thinking about this, and now it's even more pertinent than ever. So this talk's very much looking at why we're so locked into these technologies. And so we could argue, and what I will argue is that we're locked in multiple times in the form of the following stack. Initially within our own perception, then by our own image media, then across our social media, then by our hardware, mostly our mobile phone screens, our tiny real estates. And on top of that, we're literally locked into a lack of bodily movement and optic flow. You could certainly say that's the case during the pandemic. So you could say this represents a full spectrum lockdown. So the question of the talk, can technology help us break out of this situation? So Huxley's dystopian novel Brave New World seems more applicable and relevant now than ever before. Today, technology is making it possible to enslave us en masse whilst we perceive ourselves to be free. We're now suffering from such a poverty of vision in every sense, as we are endlessly distracted by technologies that effectively turn off our depth perception, pattern recognition, and long-form critical thinking. And if you think about it, Huxley's Brave New World seems to have rolled out across the West, whereas you could argue in the East, Orwell's 1984 seems to be the case. So, ruled by fear in the East. Think of social credit system rolled out in China, for instance, rather than in the West, where we're basically distracted to death. So I think that there's definitely an East-West divide there. So the first point, we're locked within our own perception. How have we become blind to the widespread effects of technology in our humanity? What is the cause of this loss of awareness? So that's kind of the overall, premise here. It's important that to understand that not all of these problems are caused by our relationship with technology, but also with the limits of our own perception. For instance, we never see ourselves as we actually are because when we look into a mirror, our reflection is reversed front to back, creating a distortion. And even when we use a true mirror to undo this distortion, the result looks unreal. You can get a true mirror just by putting two mirrors at 90 degrees together, and actually does the reversal of that effect of a normal mirror. Furthermore, in shop changing rooms, where our buying decisions are made, our perception is often intentionally manipulated by mirrors that are tilted to make us look skinnier than we actually are. Secondly, we don't actually hear ourselves as others hear us because of our own physiology. The perception of our voice does not match the external reality. When you consider the role our voice plays in the formation of our identities, then you realize the implications of this. Thirdly, neuroscience has taught us that we do not see things as they are, but as we are. This is because our brains are prediction machines that can only process a fraction of the incoming sensory information, leaving the rest dependent on our previous experiences. Finally, to compound all of this, our memory is notoriously partial and unreliable. So these four areas point us towards the realization that we're already living in a form of virtual reality. So let's move on to media construction. So with the aim of understanding our perceptual limitations, in my work, I explore how the media we can commonly interact with is also limited. For example, when we capture an image via a standard mobile phone, it only captures roughly around 80 degrees of the scene's field of view. But as we know, in reality, we see 180 degrees. So just like the mirror example, the way images are constructed does not reflect how we actually see. And you can see this also with linear perspective, and how linear perspective is the accepted way of constructing pictorial space in imagery. There's an inherent distortion, which we then have to live through. So all of our image-based media are distorted. And what does that mean for us? And then apply this to social media, another level up. Now, if we apply these media limitations to social media, then it's easy to understand why social media leaves us feeling inadequate, as we often take the photoshopped version of reality for reality itself. So moving on to the hardware, let's look at how social media plugs into those tiny real estates of mobile phones. Mobile devices narrow our focus, reducing our awareness of what is going on around us. This leads to the secondhand zombified form of living, in the sense that you're so busy, it doesn't really matter what wonderful architecture you're in or what wonderful landscape you're in. All you're doing is staring at this tiny little bit of real estate. So selfie face distortion, which is being enabled via mobile phones, which you could argue are modern day mirrors. We look less in mirrors and more, our phones which reflect us, is also driving a reported 30% increase in nose jobs, because we hold our phones at a certain angle and people think their faces are actually, or their noses are actually larger than they actually are. So we're living in an increasingly mediated world, and as a result, we are becoming dependent on digital systems that create narrow perceptual channels and bottlenecks. This is compounded by the fact that the first bottleneck within our limited perceptual bandwidth is actually us. So if you realized you were already compromised by your own physiology, you might not want to make it worse by adopting such poorly designed technology. So this talk will offer an ecology of practices that aim to help us reclaim our humanity from the machine while still retaining and taking advantage of the positive benefits that technology offers. So going back to my first career, I was doing a lot of 3D modeling of ancient buildings around the world. And my first job was actually my second job actually was in Yorkshire, reconstructing 5 Cistercian abbeys, this being one of them. This is Revo Abbey. And as you can see, there's a very, very elaborate Gothic choir and a rather less elaborate Romanesque nave there. So it was an amazing experience because of the effects that much 3D modeling had on my system. So I experienced these very surprising physiological side effects that made me realize that the impact that interacting with media can have on our perception. The first of these effects was that my peripheral vision improved. I became a better driver because I was modeling such large buildings. I could see further down the road as I was driving. So it's very strange that these only I'm working in a 2D screen, but I'm working on 3D models, but it affected my real world 3D living. Secondly, I would sort of program my dreams. I would be dreaming about the structures because I'd be working really late at night, and then I would actually have these access to these buildings in my dreams. And thirdly, I realized I was generating a number of memory palaces because these structures were so intricate, lots of sacred geometry, etc. I kind of had baked in these 3D structures into my subconscious, creating these memory palaces. So let's unpack these 3 powerful effects to see how transferable these practices potentially are. So I'm just going to start with a little exercise for all of you watching. So just want you to actually stare at the tree in the middle of the screen there, in the middle of the image, and understand that this is effectively your narrow focus that you have all day long if you're staring at your phone, the typical 150 times a day that we all do. And what I want you to do is just practice expanding your field of view now. So just spread your vision outwards so that you can take in the whole image at once. So we're starting now to practice our peripheral vision. And if you take it a step further and actually now look at the sides of the computer screen that you're looking at the image on, and actually take in the room that you're seeing, and now take in the full 180 degrees of the room. And once you do that, you'll start to see that your actual body is also part of the image that you're looking through to see the image on the screen. And now I want you to just understand that you can focus on your breathing and focus on your heartbeat and understand that that's all within the same field of view. So this demo is actually provided by Tony Langford at the Fovotech team, who specialize in making this natural media, which we've coined as a term. So, this ability to use your peripheral vision is actually an amazing way of calming down the physiology. And I practice it as I'm walking down the street. Athletes practice it as before a big race. Before a big talk, I'll actually practice my peripheral vision just to hack my own physiology. So this could also be used to try and minimize the effects of information overload. So basically try and use these exercises to really savor and integrate the information you're engaging with. So any information that you're looking at on a screen, you can apply this technique. And maybe this will actually allow you to regain a sense of the passing of time. And you may actually start to feel like you're really living instead of just existing. So the second point to unpack, the programming of dreams. As mentioned, because of the large scale 3D modeling, I developed this ability to program my dreams. So this is kind of related to this idea of perceptual ability. So a lot of lucid dreamers that I know who are very lucky to have common lucid dreams, they practice physical exercises. One of my friends does Tai Chi in his dreams, and he says it's 4 times more effective to practice Tai Chi in a dream than it is in reality, because he's having to apply the context as well as the content, i.e., if he doesn't apply gravity, he'll start to float off the ground. So he has to create the environment as well as do the exercise. So what I also do to add this extra level of perceptual flexibility is to actually practice my peripheral vision exercises inside my dreams. So this has the effect of actually allowing me to bring more back from the dreams. So we know hypnopompic and hypnagogic states. So when you're falling asleep and when you're waking up is a liminal state that actually is very important for ideation. And you know, the idea of sleeping on a problem is one that's actually very common. So how can we reliably use these states in order to re-enchant our lives? Just to remind you of the theme. So the third point, generating memory palaces. So memory palaces, as many of us know, were made famous by the Greek Roman orators who didn't write anything down. They had 7-hour speeches. And what they would do is they would map those speeches to an architectural structure that they would house in their heads, like an amphitheater. And then all they would need to do is actually remember the path through the structure to trigger the whole 7-hour speech. So this 3D modeling ability, this 7 years of 3D modeling, gave me this transferable skill of creating these memory palaces. So any one of those Cistercian abbeys, I can still remember it in my mind's eye. And what I ended up doing was mapping my PhD into this structure. So this is what I built. This is the Gothic choir that you saw from Revo Abbey. And you know, I actually mapped my 2D flat file PhD into the structure so that I could allow the PhD to actually talk to itself, for it to be kind of regenerative, because one part of the structure would be facing another part of the structure and it would have a conversation. So another point is my journal. I've been writing a diary for 30 years, and this is another form of memory palace, because I'm just writing very short bits of information, but I'm writing in a structured way. I write down the content, what I've done, the context, what I felt, and the concepts, what I've thought, just in 5 minutes. And then what I do is I actually take cross sections through it. So I'm able to look across 30 different versions of me. So 30 different years of me. And then I get them all communicating again, much like with the Cistercian architecture. So insight, as we know, is gained by taking a higher order perspective on your own perspective. And I've actually even placed this talk into a memory palace just to see how to structure it. So just to remind ourselves that as I finish this section, remember all of these abilities stemmed from 3D modeling on a 2D screen. So we know that the right kind of computer work, the right kind of engagement with technology can have real world, beneficial, transferable skills. So now let's move back into the world again. As I mentioned, the body is super important. We've all become disembodied during the pandemic. We're all like goldfish sitting in the one context. You know, we're lacking optic flow. Optic flow is just the movement of things as you move through the world in your peripheral vision. We know peripheral vision is incredibly important for memory formation, for cognition, and just for general well-being. So it's very important to have this optic flow, not just in body movement, but in just general movement, in terms of ideation, in terms of creativity. And also, you know, I'm constantly writing by hand. I'm also always making notes. And I think that we We famously learn to read more quickly when we first learn to write by hand. And we also remain better able to generate ideas and retain information. In other words, it's not just what you write that matters, but how you write it. So if you're constantly just in the digital realm, you're not going to be able to imprint that information as well as writing it by hand. So think about that as another form of enchantment. Being embodied aids our ability to think and perceive better. So what we really need is to create this hybrid reality where we bring back the analog skills and we combine them with the best of the digital so that they can reinforce each other. So in summary, as I mentioned before, we're locked in multiple times in the form of that stack. So within our own perception, within our image media, which is very distorted, and with our social media, which distorts things further. And then we're just, we're locked into our mobile phone technologies with screens everywhere. And on top of that, we're locked into a lack of movement, a lack of embodiment. So the challenge now is to address whether technology can help us break out of this, and think about this from your own perspectives. How do you use technology? Are you using it in a toxic way? Are you using it in a mindful way? Can technology help us undo the damage caused by technology? And that's really the theme of my work. So just one other area that I like to look at in terms of enchantment is this idea of perspective state shifting. So how can we perform Umwelt hacking? Umwelt hacking is experiencing the sensorial worlds of others. How can we break out of the human Umwelt? And I think that there's many different species on the planet and they all experience the same world in very different ways. And I'm conscious of the complexities of how do we sense like a forest, or how do we sense like a mycelium network? Underneath the ground, everywhere we walk, there's this intelligence that's arguably far greater an intelligence than us, because the mycelium are sharing instantly with the trees, with other plants when they're in need. So when there's abundance in the mycelium, they immediately share their goods. And I think that if we could actually use technology to show that intelligence that's going on underneath our ground, using mixed reality, for instance, to create this X-ray vision, to have this kind of almost psychedelic experience of seeing a non-capitalist way of living that is just everywhere. And could this perspective shift enabled by our technology help us to reprogram our associations and enable systemic behavior change? I think that's the critical thing. If you can see this from another perspective, will it actually change your behavior towards maybe eating animals, or just your general way of using using the economy? So if you can see that intelligence directly, will you change your behavior? And how can technology come to our mutual aid? Can we align technology with nature? We're seeing this tendency towards spatial computing. I would argue mixed reality is the next level of personal computing. I think when Apple Glass comes out, it'll be the same sort of moment that when the iPhone came out for smartphones. So mixed reality has the serious potential to not only put us back into the body, because we're not needing to necessarily like sit in front of screens at home. We can actually be wearing glasses in the world again. So we'll be back in the world. We'll also be able to reactivate our peripheral vision, because the standard pair of glasses is 180 degrees rather than a small screen. But mixed reality also has the power to degrade reality, because once you get used to the augmentation, how do you get back to the non-augmented world, and how do you get rid of the crux that maybe that would create? So we must not only replace the imagination with computer animation, because we can only ask the questions that we have the imagination for. We need to rebuild the imagination, not replace the imagination or daydreaming or anything like that. Because if you think about when you get into any kind of queue, the first thing you do is get your phone out. You destroy daydreaming. So the final practice, as I mentioned, is this one of understanding, the perspective of the fungi, understanding the perspective. Can we sense like a forest? What technologies would enable us to break out of our limited individual sensing and sense like an entire forest? So in summary, our example Ecology, which is just one that I've come up with, create your own, but maybe think about what I've suggested here as a way of structuring those enchanted ecologies. So the guidelines that I would offer, we need to create interventions that require the navigation of unfamiliar territory. We need to adapt to alternative points of view in order to expand our perceptual abilities. And finally, increasing our perceptual augmentation to expand our capacity in the world is essential. Perspective mediates consciousness. So in conclusion, as I mentioned, I've attempted to outline an ecology of practice for the re-enchantment of life. These initial practices are really intended to encourage you to make your own. By generating an ecology, we build in resilience and gain the potential to expand our consciousness literacy. Through building collectively, we can create a real testament to the imagination, instead of being fed by the algorithm. Remember to turn your ecology into a memory palace to enable cross-pollination. Let's reinvigorate and reignite the senses we've lost in order to return us to that childlike sense of wonder. The full dynamic range of our existence depends on it. Thank you very much. And if you've got any questions, just email me on c.smith@rave.ac.uk.